know, in all my years on this bench, and we're talking over 40 years here, you think you've seen everything. Police officers, they come before me all the time. Good people, most of them. They serve our community, they protect us, they deserve our respect. But that Tuesday morning, November, something walked into my courtroom that made my blood run cold. Let me tell you about Chief Robert Mancuso, 6'2", silver hair, uniform pressed to perfection. He strolled into my courtroom like he owned the place. And you know what? In his mind, he probably did. See, this wasn't about a parking ticket or a minor violation. The FBI had been building a case against this man for 2 years. Corruption, bribery, evidence tampering, the works. But nobody in Providence knew that yet. I remember getting to court that morning early, like I always do, been doing it for 40 years. My father taught me, Frank, if you are not 10 minutes early, you are late. So there I was, 8:20 a.m., reviewing my docket with a cup of coffee Christina made for me. Strong black coffee, the Italian way. And I see his name there, Chief Robert Mancuso. Contempt of court. Now, let me back up and tell you how this all started. 3 months earlier, we had a case involving Officer Tommy Rodriguez. Good kid, 5 years on the force, married with 2 little girls. He'd been accused of excessive force during a routine traffic stop. Video evidence, witness testimony, it was all there. But something wasn't right about the case file. Officer Rodriguez's partner that day was supposed to testify, but suddenly his report disappeared. Then the dash cam footage went missing. Then witnesses started changing their stories. One by one, the evidence was disappearing and the case was falling apart. That is when the federal prosecutor stepped in. They suspected someone high up was interfering with the case. Someone with enough power to make evidence disappear and witnesses change their minds. Someone like a police chief. So they subpoenaed Chief Mancuso to testify under oath about the missing evidence. Simple procedure. Show up, answer questions, tell the truth. But Mancuso, he never showed up. Not the first time, not the second time. That is how he ended up in my courtroom for contempt. I am looking at the docket that morning, and Christina leans over and whispers, Judge, this one's unusual. Unusual, that is putting it mildly. You see, in my 40 years, I've had police officers before me maybe a dozen times for serious matters. Always professional, always respectful. Even when they were wrong, they understood the process. But something felt different that morning. There were more people in my courtroom than usual. Lawyers I didn't recognize, men in suits sitting in the back rows. And Agent Sarah Collins from the FBI, though I didn't know who she was at the time. She was just another face in the crowd. But there was something about the way she was watching everything that caught my attention. So here comes Chief Mancuso walking into my courtroom at 9:30 sharp. But the way he walked, like he was doing me a favor by showing up. No respect, no humility, just arrogance, pure arrogance. He had this smirk on his face, like this was all beneath him. And I am thinking to myself, Frank, your father didn't teach you to take disrespect from anybody, badge or no badge. Behind him walked his lawyer, some expensive suit from downtown Providence. The kind of lawyer who charges $500 an hour and thinks he can intimidate small-town judges. But you know what? I've been dealing with lawyers longer than this man's been alive. Chief Mancuso, I said, looking directly at him, you failed to appear for your court-ordered testimony last week. Do you have an explanation? And this man, I'll never forget this moment for the rest of my life. He looks me right in the eye and says, Judge, with all due respect, I had more important things to do. I run a police department. I've got real criminals to catch, not sitting here answering questions about paperwork. More important things, paperwork. This was about potential witness intimidation and evidence tampering. You know what I told him, Chief, in my courtroom? There is nothing more important than following the law, the same law you swore an oath to uphold when you pinned that badge on your chest. His lawyer leaned over and whispered something in his ear, probably telling him to shut up and just apologize, but Chief Mancuso, he wasn't interested in apologies. He was interested in showing everyone in that courtroom that he was in charge. He takes a step closer to my bench. Nobody does that without permission, nobody. And he says, Judge Caprio, I think you need to understand something. I've been protecting this city for 25 years. I have relationships with people you wouldn't believe. Important people, the mayor, the governor, business leaders, they depend on me to keep this city safe. I can feel my blood pressure rising. You want to know why? Because I've seen bullies before. Growing up in Providence, when the neighborhood was tough and you had to earn your respect every day, I learned how to spot a bully from a mile away. My father worked 3 jobs to support our family, construction during the day, security at night. We can work at the docks. He taught me that no matter how much power someone has, they don't have the right to abuse it. And this man, he was the worst kind of bully, the kind with a badge and 25 years of getting away with it. Chief, I said, keeping my voice steady but firm. The only relationship that matters in this courtroom is your relationship with the truth. Now, I am going to ask you one more time, do you understand why you are here? But instead of answering my question, he turned around and looked at the packed courtroom. All those people watching, waiting to see what would happen next. And then he turned back to me with this look of absolute contempt. Judge, he said, his voice getting louder, I think you need to understand something. I run this town. Not the mayor, not the city council, not even you. I decide what happens on these streets. I decide which cases get priority. I decide what evidence is important and what evidence isn't. And frankly, I don't think you appreciate the difficult position You are putting me in here. The courtroom went dead silent. You could have heard a pin drop. I've had people yell at me before. Sure. Drunk drivers angry about losing their licenses, angry parents whose kids got arrested, people having the absolute worst day of their lives. But this was different. This was a sworn law enforcement officer, someone who took an oath to serve and protect, telling a judge that he was above the law. I looked around my courtroom. There was old Mrs. Patterson, who has been coming to watch court proceedings for 15 years. She looked horrified. There were young law students from Brown University who come to observe. They were taking notes frantically. There were lawyers who practice in my court regularly, and they were staring in disbelief. I took off my glasses. I rarely do that, but when I do, people know I am serious, and I cleaned them slowly while I thought about what to say. I thought about my father, who came to this country from Italy with nothing but hope and a willingness to work. I thought about every police officer who ever served with honor and integrity, and I thought about what justice really means in a democratic society. Chief Mancuso, I said, standing up from my bench, something I almost never do. Let me tell you something about how this works. Nobody runs this town except the law. Not you, not me, not the mayor, not the governor, the law, and right now you are in violation of it, but he wasn't finished. This man, this public servant who was supposed to protect and serve the citizens of Providence, he completely lost all self-control. His face was getting red, his voice was getting louder, and he started pointing his finger at me like I was some rookie cop he was dressing down. You know what, Judge? He said, his voice echoing through my courtroom. I've been nice so far, but I think you need a reality check. You sit up there in your little black robe thinking you're important, but let me tell you how the real world works. I've got files on everybody in this city. Judges included. I know who owes money to who. I know who is having affairs. I know who has got gambling problems. So maybe you should think very carefully about how you want to handle this situation. Files on judges. Was this man actually threatening me in open court in front of 30 witnesses? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. In 40 years on the bench, nobody had ever threatened me like this. Not drug dealers, not organized crime figures, not anyone. I looked around my courtroom again. Christina, my clerk, was pale as a ghost. The court reporter's fingers had stopped moving. She was just staring. Some of the lawyers looked scared, others looked disgusted, but one face in particular caught my attention, Agent Sarah Collins, FBI. She was sitting in the back row, and when our eyes met, she gave me the slightest nod. That is when I realized this wasn't just about contempt of court anymore. This was bigger, much bigger. They had been waiting for this moment. They wanted to see exactly how far Chief Mancuso would go when he thought his back was against the wall. I sat back down and folded my hands on the bench. When you've been a judge as long as I have, you learn to control your emotions. Even when someone is threatening you, Chief, I said, my voice as calm as I could make it, are you threatening this court? I am not threatening anybody, he replied, but his voice was shaking now. I am stating facts. I am stating the reality of how things work in this city. You can either work with me like every other judge has for the past 20 years, or you can find out what happens when you don't play along. That is when his lawyer stood up. Your Honor, my client is obviously under a great deal of stress. Perhaps we could take a short recess and sit down, Counselor. Chief Mancuso snapped at his own lawyer. I am handling this. Then he turned back to me. Judge Caprio, I am going to give you one last chance to handle this quietly. Dismiss this contempt citation. Forget about the federal subpoena, and we can all go back to business as usual. Otherwise, Chief, I asked. He leaned forward and lowered his voice. But in the dead silence of my courtroom, everyone could hear every word. Otherwise, I might have to make some phone calls. Talk to some people about your son Michael's law practice. Funny how many city contracts his firm gets. Might be worth investigating. Now he was threatening my family, my son, who worked his way through law school, who built his practice from nothing, who never asked me for any favors. This corrupt police chief was threatening my family because I wouldn't let him ignore a federal subpoena. I stood up again, and this time I felt something I hadn't felt in 40 years on the bench. I felt personal anger. Not judicial displeasure, not professional frustration. Personal burning anger. Chief Mancuso, I said, my voice carrying through the silent courtroom, you have just crossed a line that no one, and I mean no one, has ever crossed in my courtroom. That is when Agent Collins stood up. She walked slowly down the aisle, her badge clearly visible on her belt. She was followed by 3 other agents who I suddenly realized had been sitting in different parts of my courtroom the whole time. Chief Mancuso turned around and his face went from red to white in an instant. All that arrogance, all that bravado, all those threats gone in an instant. Chief Robert Mancuso, Agent Collins announced, her voice carrying through the silent courtroom. You are under arrest for criminal contempt, obstruction of justice, conspiracy, bribery, violation of civil rights under color of law, and threatening a federal judge. I watched this man who claimed he ran this town as federal agents surrounded him. Turns out they'd been recording everything, every threat, every admission, every display of corruption. They had cameras hidden in the courtroom, microphones recording every word. You have the right to remain silent. Agent Collins continued as she handcuffed him right there in front of everyone. Anything you say can and will be used against you at a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be appointed for you. Chief Mancuso tried to speak, but Agent Collins continued reading him his rights, his expensive uniform, his shiny badge, his 25 years of service. None of it mattered now. He was just another defendant who thought he was above the law. His lawyer was frantically taking notes, probably already thinking about damage control. But the damage was done. Everything had been recorded. Everything had been witnessed. As they led him away in handcuffs, he turned back to me one last time. All the fight had gone out of him. His shoulders were slumped, his face was pale, and his voice was barely a whisper. Judge, he said, I made a terrible mistake. You know what I told him? Chief, we all make mistakes. The difference is most people don't make them while threatening a federal investigation and a sitting judge. After they took him away, I call a recess. I needed a moment to collect myself. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from anger and adrenaline. I kept thinking, how many people had this man bullied over the years? How many cases had been compromised? How many good, honest police officers had been forced to look the other way while he corrupted everything they stood for? Christina came up to my bench. Judge, are you all right? I am fine, Christina, I said, but I keep thinking about all the police officers who serve with honor and integrity every day. This man just disgraced every badge in the city. Agent Collins approached my bench before she left. Your Honor, she said, we want to thank you for your patience during this investigation. This has been going on for 2 years. We needed him to show his true nature in a public forum where we could record everything. Agent Collins, I replied, in my courtroom, everyone gets treated the same. Badge or no badge, uniform or no uniform, connection or no connections. Nobody is above the law, she nodded. That is exactly why we chose your courtroom for this. Judge, your reputation for fairness and integrity is well known. We knew you wouldn't be intimidated. You want to know what happened next? Within hours, the story was all over the news, local news, national news, cable networks. Corrupt police chief arrested in Judge Caprio's courtroom after threatening judge. But that wasn't the important part. The important part came in the days and weeks that followed. 3 days later, Officer Maria Santos knocked on my chamber door. Young officer, 5 years on the force, honest as the day is long. She had tears in her eyes, Judge. She said, I wanted to thank you. Thank me for what, Officer Santos? For showing us that the badge means something again. She replied, Chief Mancuso, he was ruining everything we believed in. We couldn't speak up because he had all the power. He had files on everyone, just like he said. We were afraid. But you showed us that nobody is above the law. That is when my eyes got a little watery. You know why? Because that is what justice really looks like. Not the dramatic arrest, not the headlines, not the news cameras. Justice is when good people can sleep at night knowing that the system works for everyone. A week later, I got a visit from Detective Frank Torres, a 20-year veteran. He told me that Chief Mancuso had been running a protection racket for years. Business owners who didn't pay up would suddenly find themselves getting more tickets, more inspections, more harassment. Honest cops who asked questions would find themselves transferred to the worst neighborhoods or passed over for promotions. Judge Detective Torres said, we've been waiting for someone to stand up to him for years. You gave us our department back. 2 weeks after the arrest, the interim police chief, Captain Williams, implemented new oversight procedures, body cameras for all officers, civilian review board for complaints, transparency in all investigations. The federal government stepped in with monitors to ensure the reforms were real. 6 months later, I got a letter from the new permanent police chief. Chief Williams, Captain Williams, had been promoted. She wrote, Judge Caprio, I wanted you to know that Chief Mancuso was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison. He pled guilty to all charges. But more importantly, we've rebuilt this department from the ground up. We have new training programs, community policing initiatives, and transparency measures. For the first time in years, our officers are proud to wear their badges again. But the letter that really got to me came from Officer Rodriguez's wife, Carmen. She wrote, Judge Caprio, because of what you did, my husband's case was finally resolved fairly. The real evidence came out after Chief Mancuso was arrested. Tommy was exonerated completely. He is back on the job and loving it again. Our family will never forget what you did for justice. Chief Mancuso learned the hard way that nobody, and I mean nobody, runs this town except the law itself. He thought his badge made him untouchable. He thought his connections gave him power over the courts. He thought he could intimidate a federal investigation. He thought wrong. You know what my father taught me when I was just a kid? Frank, he'd say in his thick Italian accent, power without humility is just corruption waiting to happen. He was right. Chief Mancuso had all the power in the world, badge, uniform, connections, files on everyone, but he had no humility whatsoever, and that is exactly what brought him down. I still think about that day sometimes, how one man's arrogance exposed years of systematic corruption, how the FBI used my courtroom to catch a criminal who happened to wear a badge, how 30 people witnessed justice in real time, how democracy actually worked the way it is supposed to. But mostly I think about Officer Santos and Detective Torres and all the good police officers who serve with honor every single day. They deserve better than corrupt leaders. They deserve our respect, our support, and our trust, and that trust has to be earned through integrity, not demanded through intimidation. Chief Mancuso thought he could intimidate me into submission. He thought his badge gave him immunity. He thought his threats would make me back down. He thought wrong. In my courtroom, the only thing that matters is the law. And the law applies to everyone equally, from the homeless veteran to the police chief, from the single mother to the federal agent. You know what that case taught me after 40 years on the bench? That sometimes the biggest criminals are the ones who are supposed to protect us from crime. But it also taught me that justice has a way of finding corruption, no matter how high up it goes, no matter how many connections someone has, no matter how many files they keep on people. The system worked that day. The FBI did their job, I did my job, and justice was served, not perfect justice. Chief Mancuso's corruption had damaged a lot of lives over the years, but accountability was finally achieved. So the next time someone tells you they're above the law, remember Chief Robert Mancuso. Remember what happened when he tried to intimidate a federal investigation in my courtroom. Remember that in America, in a democracy, nobody runs this town except the Constitution itself. And remember this, when good people stand up to bullies, when institutions work the way they're supposed to, when nobody gets special treatment because of their position or connections, that is when democracy wins. I am Frank Caprio. Remember, sometimes the best judgment is not in the book, it is in your heart. But when it comes to corruption, the book is pretty clear. Nobody is above the law. Thanks for listening, and God bless.